The initiation of Richard von Rosen's military life was defined by stark, contradictory demands. The Third Reich's officer corps required absolute conformity. Yet, it also demanded audacious independence in the field. He endured grueling, demeaning exercises. These included the infamous mud crawl, which sought to strip away civilian pride and instill blind obedience. Instead, the process sparked a quiet defiance in the young soldier. Following this basic hardness came specialized training. This was a period of relative ease and profound camaraderie. It culminated in a posting to southern France in February 1941. There, the regiment enjoyed the spoils of an early victory. In the quiet luxury of a chateau near Mérignac, the officers held a gentleman's evening. It was a surreal interlude of vineyards, fine wines, and shared laughter. This world felt far away from the grinding reality that awaited them. That comfortable bubble burst in mid-March 1941. The regiment shifted first to Austria. They then moved to the vast military training depot at Warthalager near Posen, Poland.
By May, the entire 4th Panzer Division had assembled.
The final weeks were a focused blur of preparation. This culminated in the delivery of 50 new Panzer IIIs. Von Rosen's company was equipped with formidable medium armor. They knew this armor would soon be outclassed. The logistical mobilization began in earnest in June. On the 11th, the company boarded trains traveling east. The cattle cars were covered only in straw, and sanitation was forgotten. At Seidels, just 70 kilometers from the Soviet frontier, the panzers were efficiently unloaded in the pre-dawn hours. The air grew heavy with anticipation and the smell of grease and fresh ammunition. On June 16th, the crews loaded thousands of machine gun rounds. They loaded high-explosive and armor-piercing shells. 4 days later, Oberst Eberbach addressed the regiment. He warned them of the primitive conditions in Russia. This briefing was perhaps intended to foster a sense of superiority over the enemy they were about to crush. The dawn of June 22, 1941, was marked not by sunlight but by the roar of artillery. At precisely 03:15 hours, Operation Barbarossa began. The barrages ebbed and strengthened, a terrifying rhythmic pulse of destruction. Towards 0400 hours, the Führer's order of the day was read. This reading sealed their commitment to total war. Von Rosen's company moved out that afternoon. They reached the Bug River, a 150-meter-wide boundary. Pioneers had hastily thrown up a makeshift bridge. Around 16:30 hours, they crossed onto Russian soil. The first sights were jarring. Open country, and behind a hedge, the first dead Russians. It was a sight, von Rosen recalled, that brought no pleasure. The initial invasion was a relentless high-speed surge. It was driven by the imperative to reach objectives quickly. Panzer Regiment 35, part of Guderian's group, pushed through landscapes already littered with the burnt-out detritus of Soviet defenses. But the reality of the Eastern Front immediately challenged the myth of the efficient German war machine. The crazy heat quickly gave way to appalling dust. This fine, gritty powder coated everything. It clogged carburetors, leaving throats parched and eyes smarting. The dust found its way through every crack, turning their black uniforms to a filthy grey. Logistical systems buckled under the strain. Refueling was a nightmare, relying on primitive Russian installations. The terrain itself was a constant adversary. The landscape of thatched wooden houses and magnificent deciduous forests was scarred by the Rokitno swamps. These swamps bred infernal mosquitoes. Worse, they swallowed armor. Panzers frequently bogged down, requiring long, difficult recovery operations. Despite the exhaustion, there were moments of dark comfort and fleeting camaraderie. They looted stores for cigarettes and soap. They found statues of Lenin and Stalin in every captured town. Soldiers found solace amidst the destruction. They enjoyed looted bread and butter and listened to accordion music that evoked dreams of home. Yet the physical toll was immense. Washing and coffee were luxuries and had to be forgotten, von Rosen noted. They endured cold, aching bones from sleeping upright, soaked through and utterly dog-tired. The air was thick with the foul stench of dead Russians and horses. It was an indescribable sight. The advance continued toward the Dnieper. The objective shifted from Mogilev to the crucial Dnieper bridge at Stary-Bychow. The company reached the Druth, a Dnieper tributary. They found the wooden bridge destroyed, forcing a split in the column. The push towards Stary-Bychow became a desperate race. They attempted a difficult amphibious crossing. Some panzers sank halfway, water rushing through the driver's hatch. Yet, they achieved the impossible. The bridge was captured by surprise. This rapid success bred a fatal overconfidence. Believing the enemy was routed, a small German spearhead of only 5 panzers thrust into the town. They were exploiting incomplete anti-tank ditches. They were seeking not just to hold the bridge, but to break the enemy's back. But the Russians had not fled. They had established the deep-layered defences of the Stalin Line. The Stary-Bychow crossing was defended by an estimated 65 anti-tank guns. The German armoured column advanced along an embankment road. This was a move von Rosen realised too late was suicidal. They were served up on a platter. The ambush was immediate and brutal. The spearhead was annihilated. Von Rosen's own Panzer III took a direct, deafening hit. Its rear caught fire fiercely. Bullets whistled around them as the crew scrambled out into the open. The crew included von Rosen, driver Feldwebel Volz, and Feldwebel Gorler. They found little cover. Their desperate flight led them to a dark tunnel opening into an earth bunker. This was a suffocating, claustrophobic sanctuary. There they cowered for 36 harrowing hours. The oppressive, sultry air of the Russian summer added to their torment. Thirst and hunger became pathological. Russian patrols passed directly overhead. Their harsh shouts and the rumble of their movements were a constant threat. This plunged the trapped men into paroxysms of terror. In the grim darkness, they discovered a wounded Russian civilian. In a moment that seared itself into von Rosen's memory, the commander gave an order. Desperate to preserve their meagre ammunition, he ordered the man silenced. It was a stark, dehumanizing act forced by the brutal calculus of survival.
As a brewing storm added to the tension, they planned their escape under the rising moon.
At 2200 hours, they began their crawl toward the river. They navigated short grass, then longer grass, and a thin layer of mist. They moved through the darkness. They were acutely aware of the sounds of Russian sentries and the approaching artillery fire. The immense scale of the Soviet war machine was now apparent. This was evident in the well-prepared defences. It was also seen in the 72 hours of ceaseless fighting required to relieve them. The indescribable sights of burnt-out Soviet tanks and equipment stretched to the horizon. The sheer volume of destruction was a silent, terrifying testament to the vast, unpredictable nature of the Eastern Front. This forced von Rosen to reflect on the fate of Napoleon and the Grande Armée. It was a chilling foreshadowing of the difficulties that lay ahead. The speed of the war, which had initially carried Richard von Rosen forward, now violently flung him back. On August 3, 1941, during the advance on Roslavel, the bridge he was crossing collapsed under his Panzer III. The vehicle plunged downward. The immediate impact crushed 3 fingers on his left hand. The injury was so severe that amputation was narrowly avoided. The wound, a physical and psychological shock, ended his first tour of duty. He returned to the Reich, a world away from the dust and terror of the front. After a hospital stay in Greiz, where his mother visited, he was sent to the Panzer Reserve Abteilung at Bamberg. The German military, bleeding experienced men, recognized his battlefield competence. Influenced by his former commander, von Rosen was placed on the fast track to leadership. He reported for officer training in Berlin on February 25, 1942. He endured a 3-month slog that ended with him graduating at the top of his class. The need to replenish the officer corps with proven veterans was paramount. On June 1, 1942, Richard von Rosen was promoted to lieutenant. But the strategic landscape had shifted irrevocably during his recovery. The vast, swift victories of 1941 were ancient history. The catastrophic encirclement of the Sixth Army at Stalingrad was underway. The U-boat war was collapsing. Defeats in North Africa signaled the irreversible decline of the German war effort. For the troops at the front, the news of the Stalingrad pocket's final extinction on February 2, 1943, was a devastating psychological blow. Hitler's prohibition on breakout attempts and the subsequent announcement that the Sixth Army was a mass grave shattered frontline confidence in the High Command's strategic competence. The men operated in what von Rosen called the Valley of the Ignorant, Constant radio jamming and limited information flow bred profound skepticism. They doubted the amateurish decisions coming from above. In this climate of dwindling hope, the German High Command sought refuge in technology. Von Rosen's new assignment marked a radical shift to heavier armor and defensive engagements. He was commanding a platoon in heavy Panzerabteilung 503. His company received its first Tiger I tanks in December 1942, weighing 58 tons, armed with the formidable 8.8 centimeter gun and encased in thick armor. The Tiger was instantly hailed by the troops. It was seen as near life assurance, yet the journey to deploy this technological marvel exposed the rot in the German logistical machine. Von Rosen's train transport, loaded with the massive new tanks, departed Fallingbostel in late December. They spent New Year's Eve stalled in Gomel, White Russia. The profound cold on the steppe often plunged to -30 degrees Celsius. Crews were forced to rely on a blow lamp for minimal warmth in the cattle trucks. This was a stark contrast to the oppressive heat inside the panzers in milder weather. At railway stations, the sight of nervy Romanian soldiers appearing like an army in retreat was a grim portent. Once deployed, the myth of the efficient German war machine quickly dissolved. The Tigers, while powerful, were mechanically complex and vulnerable. They were plagued by engine damage. This often required difficult nighttime recovery operations across the snow-covered steppe. Von Rosen recalled one terrifying tow operation. They had to shut off the engines to listen for enemy sounds. They only heard the chilling howl of wolves across the vast frozen landscape. The sheer weight of the 58-ton Tiger posed immense logistical challenges. It required pioneers to construct 60-ton capacity bridges. Specialized recovery vehicles were often unavailable. Bureaucratic delays and internal command frustrations were constant. Von Rosen even recalled a crazy order to attack over a log road in swamplands. This demonstrated a fatal disconnect between commanders and frontline reality. This grim operational background led directly into the crucible of Operation Citadel. This was the Battle of Kursk, fought in July 1943. It was intended to be the decisive offensive, but Russian intelligence had been perfectly informed since March. This allowed for the construction of deep-layered, well-camouflaged defensive positions. The German element of surprise was negated. Von Rosen's unit, Heavy Panzer Abteilung 503, was tasked as the can opener for the following panzer formations. But the advance was slow, grinding, and costly. The initial shock was the quality of the enemy. The German tankers rapidly realized, as von Rosen would later articulate, that we would discover that the Russian soldier we would face was no longer the man of 1941-2, but a soldier our equal in fighting efficiency and morale. The Soviet defenses were brutally effective. The Germans encountered the terrifying Su-152. These were armed with a 152mm flat trajectory howitzer. The Soviet tactic was lethal. They allowed the lighter German armor to pass before engaging with overwhelming firepower. During one engagement, the German advance halted abruptly. They were faced with concentrated fire from over 20 barrels. The Tiger, the supposed solution to German vulnerability, was not invincible. Its lateral gearing was a known weakness. Even its thick frontal armor could be countered. The combat was intense, measured in agonizing hours. On July 14th, during a relentless exchange, von Rosen's Tiger sustained multiple hits. The gun was knocked from its elevation machinery, the barrel fell, and the breech slammed into the turret roof. In the deafening concussion, von Rosen's arm was violently jammed between the deflector plate and the turret roof. He sustained a severe flesh wound down to the bone and a fractured radius. The injury forced his immediate evacuation to a military hospital in Kharkov. This removed him from the battle, just as the operation dissolved into a costly failure. The Battle of Kursk marked the definitive end of German offensive dominance on the Eastern Front. It demonstrated the significantly improved fighting effectiveness and defensive capabilities of the Red Army. The technological superiority of the Tiger had proven insufficient against overwhelming numbers. It failed against the sheer resilience of an enemy that had found its footing. Von Rosen's wound, sustained in the heart of the failed offensive, symbolized the heavy human cost of a war that had become one of attrition against an increasingly capable foe. The opening of the Western Front, on June 6, 1944, was not merely a new theatre of operations, It was the final, fatal strategic blow to the German war machine. General Oberst Guderian recognized the catastrophe immediately. He warned that if the Allied bridgehead in Normandy was not eliminated within 2 weeks, the war was lost. German forces were already bled white by the Soviet offensive against Army Group Center. They now faced an enemy backed by industrial capacity and air power they could not match. The logistical chokehold tightened instantly. Partisan activity flared in the rear. Over 12,000 railway track sections were destroyed in July and August 1943 alone. This crippled the movement of troops and supplies before they even reached the front. Richard von Rosen, having returned to the front with his heavy Panzer Abteilung 503, arrived in Dreux in early July 1944. The scale of the Allied material superiority became terrifyingly clear. On July 11th, von Rosen's 3 Company, led by Hauptmann Scherf, was ordered to counterattack a British breakthrough near Giberville. The engagement began with the familiar chaos of combat compounded by technological failure. Their aerial was shot away, leaving them without reliable communication. In a flash of battlefield urgency, von Rosen issued a desperate ultimatum. He demanded they attack immediately, or he would open fire on their own tanks to force the advance. The company charged. They achieved a localized, fleeting victory, destroying 11 British Shermans and capturing 2 others. But this tactical triumph was immediately swallowed by the tide of Allied firepower. The German position was subjected to a relentless and unimaginable artillery bombardment. Von Rosen described the incoming shells as gigantic peas raining down. They shook the ground like an earthquake and plunged the area into darkness under a cloud of dust and filth. For over 8 hours they were marooned. They were subjected to precise naval gunnery that relentlessly straddled their positions. The culmination of this aerial terror arrived on the morning of July 18th. It preceded Operation Goodwood. Waves of Allied aircraft blanketed German positions near Emmyville, Cagny, and Manorville. They dropped nearly 8,000 tons of bombs. The landscape was instantly transformed into a grey, repulsive moonscape of overlapping deep craters. The sheer destructive force overcame even the formidable protection of the Tiger. Tiger 312 took a direct hit. Oberfeldwebel Sachs's Tiger 313, a 58-ton King Tiger, was violently flipped onto its turret by the blast. Many vehicles suffered engine fires from cooling system damage. Their heavy guns were decalibrated. By 1000 hours, only 6 panzers were roadworthy. The company suffered 16 dead. In the aftermath, the desperate attempts to resist the Allied advance were often futile. With decalibrated guns and damaged vehicles, they tried to engage the British tanks. This confirmed the unit's dire straits. The myth of German armoured invincibility, already challenged in Russia, was utterly annihilated. It was destroyed by the relentless, overwhelming power of the Allied Air Force. The inevitable collapse followed swiftly. The Allied breakthrough at Avranches and the subsequent encirclement of forces in the Falaise pocket shattered the German Western Front. The retreat from France was a logistical nightmare. It was a scramble of salvage and evasion. Amidst this military disintegration, the political ground shifted beneath the soldiers' feet. On July 20th, while von Rosen was on convalescent leave in Paris, news of the assassination attempt on Hitler spread like wildfire. The reaction among the officers was complex. It blended shock with a growing, profound disillusionment. They were skeptical of the endless propaganda surrounding wonder weapons like the V1 and V2. They recognized them as desperate attempts to buoy false hopes. More critically, the plot amplified the internal political fracture. Many officers openly expressed satisfaction at the arrests of SS personnel. They drew a sharp distinction between the professional Wehrmacht and the SS. They now openly viewed the SS as the Nazi Party's army. Trapped in a collapsing war with no prospect of a military turn of tide, the soldiers began to hope. They believed continued, desperate fighting might force an honourable armistice. They preferred this to facing the inevitable total defeat. The chaos of the retreat underscored the systemic failures of the German military machine. In mid-August 1944, a train carrying 6 King Tigers came under terrifying attack from thunderbolts. They were loaded onto special Reichsbahn transporters. Machine gun fire erupted from the clear sky. It ignited 2 wagons loaded with 88.8 centimeter rounds. The resulting explosions were a terrifying spectacle of heat and sound. Valuable King Tigers were lost, not to enemy tanks, but to fire and subsequent air attacks. This included von Rosen's own Panzer III, which tipped over and was later captured. The incident resulted in 6 severely wounded men and the death of Unteroffizier Wehrheim near the locomotive. The abandonment and destruction of this valuable hardware confirmed the devastating reality. It was lost due to a lack of fuel, recovery resources, and the simple inability to move them under air supremacy. Logistics and air power, not armor thickness, would determine the war's end. The King Tiger, the very symbol of German technological superiority, was being defeated by a lack of gasoline and a clear sky. By late 1940, heavy Panzerabteilung 503 was no longer a spearhead, it was a desperate fire brigade. Equipped with the remaining King Tigers, the unit was rushed to Hungary. This was a collapsing theatre where the front lines were dissolving under relentless Soviet pressure. Their mission was not victory, but delay. They were to secure the hasty withdrawal of infantry divisions and plug the holes in a front that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Lieutenant von Rosen's battle group comprised perhaps a dozen operational Tigers and its own crucial logistical tross. They operated with a terrifying autonomy. They were constantly shifting to the next crisis point. The enemy was not just the Red Army, it was the earth itself. The late autumn and winter brought a constant cycle of thaw and freeze. This turned the Hungarian plains into a morass. The deep, nauseating mud and slush became a physical antagonist. It clung to shoes like lumps of clay and swallowed vehicles whole. Recovery operations were nightmares of futility.